All right, so we're back with Ken and Mike, and my uncle's escaped Alcatraz, and we have a special guest, Paolo Cascio, who's a friend of Ken's, and he's been talking to Ken for a while about Alcatraz ever since the History Channel documentary that was on. So, but Ken, give us a little bit of background with your relationship, and then Paolo, welcome to the podcast, and we'll throw it to you after that to kind of give you a little bit of background as well.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the way I met, and I always refer to him as PC. It was right after the History Channel documentary, and History Channel had pretty much pulled the plug on what we thought was going to be the ability for us to tell the story, in depth, really tell the story of John and Clarence, and it just really kind of went kaput. And so during this time frame, I'm getting ready and preparing for the Alcatraz triathlon. I'd been invited in 2016. And we had a Facebook, I had a Facebook page set up that History Channel had us do. And I had a lot of people throughout the year, and still do today, reach out to me and say, hey, I want to help you. I want to talk to you about the show. And for whatever reason, I picked up on this one that Paulo had sent me. And I said, okay, I think I'm going to talk to this guy. And so, I gave him my phone number. We got on the phone together. We started talking. He was telling me, some of his connections that he had in the industry and all of the stuff that he was involved in. And I was telling them about the story and how that I really wanted it to go forward, and how, down I was from the History Channel doing what they did. And Paulo said, why don't you write a screenplay? And I was like, I don't even know how to write, pretty much. And so, he said, well, here, let me tell you, give me some suggestions. He said, go out and purchase Final Draft, which at the time I didn't know what it was. All I knew is he said, this is what people who write screenplays use. And he told me, he said, grab a piece of paper, write down all of the characters, anything you can think about each of the characters. He was kind of helping me build this character base. I didn't realize at the time. And so, when I hung up from the phone with him, I was so excited. I was, okay, this is going to be great. I know what I'm going to do. And so I reach, of course, I get on the phone with my brother and Michael Esslinger, because I was going to invite them. I said, hey, would y'all like to be a part of this? And I was telling them everything that PC told me. Well, Michael was, he was involved in writing the book that he was doing at the time. And my brother was scanning in photos for him. And they just didn't seem like they really had the time to do it. And I said, well, I guess I'll do it on my own. So I, went out, I purchased Final Draft, and I watched several videos. I took several classes trying to figure out how to use this software, how you're supposed to write something. And I just basically, said, I'm going to do this from the scratch. And I started off how I envisioned this story to go. My story started off with Uncle Man telling the story. And so I wrote it. And as I was writing it, I started thinking, I'm glad that I'm doing this, and that I'm not letting someone else do it. Because I started thinking, my family, the Anglin family, they worked with Don DeNeve on The Riddle of the Rock, and they gave him, pieces of information to put into the book. But really and truly, the book is written by him. It's his work, And as good as Michael is, Esslinger, with books, I love his books. His book is about, it would have been his words and not mine. And so, case in point was when me and Mike first started writing the book, Mike was going to write one of the chapters. And when it came back, it was about my grandfather. And I told him, I said, that's not my grandfather. I know you did the best you could, me explaining it to you, but that is not my grandfather. He wasn't, he was a lot more stern than what you wrote. That's when it really kind of clicked with me. I was really the only one that could write this because I knew who my family were. I knew my grandfather. I knew how he spoke. I knew how he talked. I knew his thoughts. And, I can remember sitting on his lap, writing, lighting his pipe and him talking to me. I knew exactly the kind of person he was. He wasn't so strict that he was mean, but he wasn't a saint at the same time. He was in between. And so I'm glad that PC did what he did for me. I mean,
it sounds like Paulo, you basically lit the fuse for the book.
Yes.
You lit the fuse because as Ken has talked about numerous times, is that the screenplay was the entree to writing the book. So tell us how you got so interested in it and reached out to him, and how that dialogue started. I mean, I know you're in the entertainment business. I believe you're a cinematographer. Is that what it is? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So what's really interesting for me is I grew up on horses, and my dad had me doing horse shows, and I had aspirations of being a jockey. And in 1979, I'm going to date myself here, which is just fine. My family went to San Francisco for spring break. I was a junior in high school. It was, I think around April or something like that. And my parents were like, well, there's lots of cool stuff to do here, and let's take this Alcatraz tour. So we took the tour, and as soon as we got there, I sensed that there was something going on. I didn't know what it was, but something felt like, it seems like they're hiding something here that they don't want us to see. And there was a couple people kind of milling around. Well, lo and behold, about 2.5 hours later, this was back in the days of guided tours, I came out, and there was this entire movie crew that had descended upon Alcatraz to shoot a TV movie called Alcatraz, The Whole Shocking Story. And it was the story about Clarence Carnes, who was the youngest person to ever be incarcerated at Alcatraz. And so I had this little camera with me, and I took a picture of this camera sitting on the ground. And it was literally like, I felt like this lightning bolt from the sky, and God's hand coming down and pointing a finger going, this is your real future. And I just became absolutely obsessed and fascinated with just the experience of being at Alcatraz and the history of it. I've always been sort of fascinated with old, closed down and dilapidated buildings. And I had, from there on, it was interesting because everywhere I went during that trip, there was another film crew that was shooting some footage for another TV show. They had a camera mounted on the front of a trolley, and they were going down the street. I'm like, there's another movie camera. I'm like, this is crazy. And then we're walking down the street, and I see a camera store, and suddenly all these things are leaping out at me. And so I've always had a real fondness for Alcatraz, because that was the spark really that started my movie career. And from there on out, my dad took me to a camera store, and he said, my son's really interested in photography. And he said, well, let's see about getting him a camera. So my dad bought me this camera, and it was very expensive at the time. And he said, well, how's he supposed to learn how to use this? And the guy had pointed to this table that had books on it. And he says, well, there's a book over there that has some really good information. And it's got a cassette tape. So it's kind of like a modern day Rosetta Stone, how I learned photography. And all through that time, I was kind of self-taught. I was taking pictures of everything. I mean, I was taking pictures of basketball games at my school. I was taking pictures of friends. I was experimenting with different kinds of things. I learned how to process and develop my own black and white film. And as soon as I graduated high school, I ended up going to a junior college where I ended up being on the newspaper. And one of the guys there said, he goes, well, you're interested in being a filmmaker and a cinematographer. He goes, you should go to Columbia College. I'm like, I don't even know what that is. This is pre-internet. So like you had to go to the library to get any information. So I found out about Columbia College, literally dropped out of I think my second semester of junior college. And I started going to film school, where I spent 2.5 years there before I ended up sort of breaking into the industry, working at a rental house, which sort of launched my career. I learned all the mechanics of all the cameras that were out there. I got to learn all the different production companies that were in Chicago, all the different crew members. And so I became sort of just pulled into this vacuum of, oh my gosh, like I'm working in the industry now. This is crazy. So spent a couple of years working in a rental house, and then I ended up freelancing. I started my freelance career in 1986, And I landed my first screen credit in 1987 on the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is like,
It's a good one.
That's a good one to
I
start
still
with.
think like it's one of the greatest credits I've ever gotten. And every year, we have a family, everybody sits down and watches it. And oddly enough, this past year, there's a Harkins Theater here in Surprise, or I think it's Peoria, Arizona, and they had a special screening of it. And I contacted Harkins Cinema, and I said I was actually one of the camera crew on this movie. I said, I don't know if you ever have people that kind of come in and talk or whatever. So anyway, they got me in there, and after the movie, the entire theater stayed and listened to me telling stories about what it was like working on that movie and all the funny things that happened along the way. But that's sort of the fast track of me getting up to speed and my first movie credit. But I had really become a lot more interested in documentaries. I kind of left the studio system, as it were, working on movies and television shows in 2013. I sort of hit a brick wall, and I sort of felt like I didn't feel like an artist, and my passion had really started to backslide. And I kind of felt like I was just there for a paycheck. And I knew that was the beginning of the end. If I didn't do something drastic, I was just going to get worse. And so I decided to leave the studio system, as it were, and kind of build my own company and start doing the things that I was really passionate about, which is really important. And in 2014, I think is when Ken and I met, or 2013, right around there.
I think it's 2016.
What was it, 2016? Okay, yeah, I kind of lost track of time. So I've moved all over the place. I lived in Los Angeles. I lived in Atlanta. And when I had met Ken, it was just kind of wild. I mean, I have no problem reaching out to people and just trying whatever I can, because when I get excited about something, like, just get out of my way, because I will find a way, come hell or high water, that I will pursue something at every possible angle I can until I get it. Because one of the things that my father had taught me was that, your passion supersedes everything. You can't, there's two things you cannot hide: your wild enthusiasm for something, or your complete boredom and disdain. And so I watched this program. I was sitting there with my dad, and I go, this is really fascinating. I go, I'm going to try to find this guy. So I went on Facebook, and literally like 5 minutes later, I introduced myself. I'm like, I've been in the film industry for 30 years. I'm fascinated with Alcatraz. It's very special, and it's very intimate, a very strong connection. This is what started my career. And I would love to talk to you and see if there's some way that I can help you push this along. I had a lot of contacts in the industry that I open my door to anybody that has a good project. I try to help them out. I never ask for anything in return, which is, a lot of people are like, well, sign this NDA, and if I help you, you're going to pay me. I never said that. I mean, I looked at Ken as a collaborator, even though I didn't really know him. I'm like, I'd love to help you get this story out, because I'm absolutely fascinated with Alcatraz. And, I'm just here to help if I can. And I'd love to be a part of this in any way, shape, or form, whatever happens with it. So that's kind of hopefully enough information.
Wow, very, very, very clear story and backstory for how you got to this point. And then, is there any? And we talk about this once a week. We've been talking about this once a week for a year now. We talk about their book. We talk about new theories. We're doing investigations as we're doing this. We hopefully have some really interesting information that's going to be coming out soon. But we're trying to get everything going, and to help prove Ken and Mike's thesis in their book based upon all the research they've done. Two questions: have you read their book yet? And number two, what is some of the big things that really fascinate you about this story?
Well, I think first and foremost, everyone loves a good mystery solved. That's just, I think, human nature. People love to, unsolved mysteries and things like that. And I think just Ken's passion for this is it's not like he stumbled upon this idea that he wanted to go see if these guys that escaped were actually still out there. I mean, this is his family we're talking about, and so I applaud his every ounce of energy he's put into this so far, because, this is a very strong connection to him. But it's good that he just grabbed the reins on this, because, there's a great saying, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I think, you just recognize like, man, it'd be great if somebody like look in the mirror, that somebody might be you, And so he just jumped in. It's not the height of your intelligence, it's the level of your ambition that really gets people's attention. And that's one of the things that's always attracted me to projects is I don't look for the most experienced people on the planet. I look for the people who have the most heart and passion and excitement for what they're doing, because that's what inspires me and that's what inspires other people to come aboard on a project in any level. If someone says, well, what's your budget? Yeah, I do that on a corporate level now. When somebody calls me to shoot an event, it's like, I wanted to make sure that I'm the right fit. And if I'm not, I'll just say, I'm probably not the best fit for you, but if I can recommend somebody else to help them out, I will. If not, I'll just, hey, I don't know if you really have enough, realistic budget right now to try to get this done. And one of the things that a line that I always use with producers is, sometimes they come up with this great idea in this project and they present this script or this idea. And I take things out of context because I'm dyslexic and I'm a visual learner. So I'll say, okay, let's just pretend like you just showed me a Betty Crocker chocolate cake box. And like, here's this beautiful cake. This is what we want to make. I'm like, that looks great. I'd love to help you make that cake. Turn the box around and tell me if you have all those ingredients. Well, we're kind of working on this and that. And I'm like, okay, do you want cupcakes or brownies? Like, I'm here to help you, but I will help you do whatever you can with what you have resources for. I've learned to never say no unless it's just an obvious no. I try to just be sensitive to people's, this is something that they're excited about. And I'm not here to shatter people's dreams, but I'm here to sort of help them manage their expectations of what can be expected and what they can do. And so, with that said, I think it's important that, you, when you're talking about doing something, it's, Ken is just naturally excited about this. This is his family. And like, this is going to get done in one way, shape, or form. It might not be the Betty Crocker cake. It might be cupcakes or brownies, which means this could be a documentary series that could be like, oh my gosh, like Netflix snaps this stuff up in 8 episodes all day long. I have some people that I know at Netflix, which I'd be, to try to help along, whatever channel that is. I mean, sooner or later, I'm going to know somebody that knows somebody because I've been in my whole life. In fact, we've been working on my buddy Steve Campanelli, who's been with Clint Eastwood for 25 years. And I said, Steve, I want to send you the script. I want to send this book and, tell me what you think. I mean, what could be better than an Alcatraz movie directed by Clint Eastwood's protege, who's been with him, for such a long time. And Clint could just rubber stamp his name as executive producer. But, those are some of the things that I think really caught my attention about the book was the honesty, how he painted the picture of what his family looked like, the backstory of where they came from, what that world looked like growing up. I think it's important that we understand the characters and we start to learn about them. And most importantly, we start to care about these people. We want to root for them. We want to see them find their way. Right. I think that's important. Like if you don't care about the characters, if you're not engaged, then the story's only going to go so far if the characters aren't believable or you're just not like, well, I don't think who are these people?
Yeah, I mean, that was the biggest thing for us because for me, I went to undergraduate in San Francisco area, I've been to Alcatraz several times. It's always been this mysterious lore in the Bay Area. And, but, I didn't really know much about these guys. I was like, oh, okay, these guys were in prison, then they escaped, whatever, I don't know. And then when we got the book, I was like, oh my God, I love the book so much because those characters come alive and you are rooting for them and you do want them to survive and you do want to have Ken reunite with that family. You can't help it. You're just drawn in. It was written so well and on so many different layers to the characters that for me, I felt very connected to them, which I never expected. They had personalities and faces and they weren't just these 2 mugshots of 2 guys that possibly escaped Alcatraz. They were human beings with a family who's looking for them. And to me, that's the story. And that's what emotionally connected us to the book and why we're doing all of this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, the fact that, these both John and Clarence, and not omitting Frank Morris, but just because these two guys are brothers and family members, is that, what was really revealing in the book is just the origin story of how they basically were grooming themselves for this iconic escape ever since they were like their early teens. It's almost like they went to the Cool Hand Luke camp. It's like, everywhere they were going, they were testing the system. They were doing stress tests on every place they were getting thrown into and learning along the way, in addition to all the other things that they were doing outside, when they were just growing up. And it's just, making their own toys and, stealing stuff that they needed to kind of, to just like for bikes or for cars or for give like toys for their siblings and stuff like that. They became craftsmen and cunning, and even to the point where they grew up around water and were just not afraid of water. And it's just like it's good. They would swim for miles in Tampa Bay and stuff like that. So they just level of fearlessness and ingenuity that they kind of gained from an early age, that they just kind of, that no one taught them, that they taught them all themselves, and that all of those things were going to come into play in 1962 when they had to put all that stuff into play. It's like, oh, well, we have to do this because, well, that we have to make plaster mache heads or paper mache heads of our stuff. And he goes, well, I'm a good artist, and then this is how we'll do it. And we'll ask for paint stuff, we'll paint portraits of our girlfriends, and, and how are we going to figure out how to do this? And he goes, well, I'm working in the barbershop. Well, I'll do this. And then they get help from other people. And the fact that they're in the same way you were talking about passion and enthusiasm for what inspired you to do your life's work, it was almost like they were continually, they played into the curiosity and of what the human spirit is. And it wasn't like this is an obstacle, but the obstacle was always the way.
But also that they weren't really yes, they stole money from a bank, but they used a toy gun. So to me, it's like no one got hurt. These aren't like violent criminals. I didn't know any of this until I read the book. Yeah. So and also I think it's also a lot of themes of like what it is to have fate in your life. These guys were in California and they did go to Alcatraz and they were like, oh, we don't ever want to be in Alcatraz. All this foreshadowing just naturally, which is what our lives are. We don't see it at the time. It's only when we do this, 360 overview that we say, oh my gosh, all these pieces connect together. Just like he was saying, like all the things of their childhood, everything led them to where they ended up, which is why we know they're in Brazil.
We believe.
Necessity is the mother of all invention. I mean, that's kind of one of the things. Like, I'm sure there were guys that were just sitting around going, well, I guess I'm here for the rest of my life, and then just sit there and rot. I mean, they, some people are, they just, they're sort of mentally and emotionally dead. And the body just waits to go in the box at the end of the road. But the fact that they were like, their imaginations were going, and they were like, I wonder if we could get out of here, and then like, well, how would we do that? I mean, that's like, when you invest energy and thought into anything, you learn, you understand things better. And I think it's, I teach workshops now to, aspiring filmmakers that start off as photographers and they want to learn how the filmmaking process works. So I think I've been doing that for 7 years now. It's called Filmmaking for Photographers. And one of the things, some of my closing comments is like, stay curious, always be trying to learn something. It's when you don't understand your tools or an industry or anything, it becomes 80% you think about the mechanics of it. And when you master those things, it becomes 20% of what you think about. The other 80% is thought process or creativity or approach, or how are we going to go about doing something like that? Like I play golf a lot, and when I first started, it was just like, God, you got to do this, you got to do this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And now I don't even really think about it. I just sort of like let my body do what it's naturally going to do, because I'm not thinking about 20 things before I try to hit the ball. And when you're so locked up in trying to control something, they always say that, a lot of things that happen on an epic level come to people when they're the most relaxed. And
Yeah, it's called the flow. It's the flow.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a lot of books written on it, and it just, I think it's just.
That's why everybody gets ideas when they're in the shower.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or when
3
you're
o'clock in the
jogging.
morning, you get up to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I got this brainstorm, and then you can't go to sleep until 6 o'clock.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just want to jump in real quick and just add a thought. When you were talking earlier about when you saw the documentary in 2015, and you said to yourself, I got to reach out to Ken. I got to talk to this guy. I got to be a part of the story. My story is exactly the same. I saw the same documentary you did. And as soon as I saw it, I said to myself, actually, I said it to my wife, it's like, I got to be a part of the story. I don't know who Ken is, but I got to try to track him down. And by the time I finally did, he'd already, I don't know if he'd finished the screenplay. I know he started it. And I told him I have a background in screenwriting, and I would be very interested in talking to him about telling the story. And at the time, he didn't know who I was, and so he wasn't going to just send it to me and reveal all the secrets. And so he told me he had a lawyer, and on the advice of his lawyer, he couldn't release this information. Well, there was no lawyer. That was his polite way of blowing me off. And so
Hollywood, no.
Yeah. And so, and he's working with you at this time, helping him with his screenplay and, how to create it. Because I told him, I said, if your screenplay is not polished, if it's not ready to go, if you send it to somebody, you've just blown your shot with them, because, they don't have time to work with you to craft the script. It's got to be, film ready when you send it to them. Of course, they're going to have their notes, they're going to have their ideas, and they're going to want to make their changes. But it's got to be 100% ready. And so when he finally sent it to me, well, it took a year. It took a year of convincing him to say, I'm trustworthy. I'm not going to, betray you in any way, kind of thing. And he had exhausted his opportunities, sending him to different people. They all declined. And when I finally saw the story, I understood why they said no, because I told this to Ken before, so I'm not going to hurt his feelings, but I told him, you sent the wrong story. Because he sent them the before Alcatraz story. And I said, no studio is going to do that, because he was going to do a 3-movie deal on the story of his uncles. And I said, no studio is going to do that either. They want the after story. They want after the escape. That's the story they want, because Clint Eastwood told the Alcatraz story.
Right.
Now they want the after story. And that's what we started to focus on. What's the after story? How is that all going to happen? But we also used the screenplay as the template for the book. When we finally decided we're going to write the book, that was our starting point. So it did serve a really very good purpose. And Ken was adamant about wanting to tell the uncle stories. He says, I want people to get to know them as people, their thoughts, their feelings, their hopes, their dreams, everything about them. We want to incorporate that into the story and not make it sort of a dry biography, from a mile up looking down on them. You want to be walking with them. We want to be in their shoes. And that's what we strove for in the book. So because of your help and because of what you did for Ken, that enabled me to do what I was able to do with him, partner with him for the book. So it's interesting how the pieces all lined up, and now here we are. Yeah. But unfortunately, I got to go. I have to be somewhere right now, so I have to make a quick exit. So it was nice to meet you, and I will look forward to seeing the rest of this interview online when it gets posted.
Cool. All right, Mike. We'll talk to you later, bud.
Bye, Mike.
All right. Bye.
Yeah.
All right. So, Paulo, so you got to that point where you got him writing. And let's talk a little bit about what your true, what's the core fascination with this story? And are there any elements that are more interesting to you than the others? Is it the actual escape? Is it their background? Is it like the aftermath, them being on the run in Brazil, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of everything, because since Ken and I have spoken, I watched Prison Break and just started binge watching that. I thought, this is one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. And we just watched Escape.
Is that the TV show?
What?
Did you do that?
Yeah, the TV show Prison Break.
He directed one of them.
Yeah, I actually worked on that. I actually worked on that.
He was one of the directors on there.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Yeah.
So Dante Spinotti was one of my mentors who shot the pilot, and I got a chance to work with him and Brett Ratner when we were over at a film festival in Poland. But yeah, it's a fascinating story. I like the timeline, and
It's a great series.
Yeah, fantastic. And Escape from Dannemora, I was just, whenever it says based on a true story, I'm like, ooh, I start leaning in. And one of the things that, my wife and I talked about, who, she's not works in the tech industry. She's not a creative. So we kind of balance each other out that way. She's like, if I don't care about the characters, like, I'm not going to watch something. And
Exactly.
it's sort of like something that I've always known, but I never really verbalized it. And it's like, you start to really care about, like, these guys. You start to know them, and you start to see, there's integrity. Just because somebody made a bad mistake or made a bad decision, it doesn't mean they're evil. It just means, like, oops, I shouldn't have probably gone 80 miles an hour in a 40, and now I'm in jail.
Yeah.
But that was really fascinating to me to kind of watch that. And I completely agree with you, Rob, that, it's the discovery, like, what's going to happen after. And I think there's this, like, searching for Bigfoot sort of a thing. Like, is it real? Is it really out there? Is this possible? I actually met one of the guys. I bought his book. I went back to Alcatraz in 2006. And I bought his book, and he's like, I was at Alcatraz. I forgot the guy's name. I got the book somewhere, and he signed it for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, you'd love to just have a 12-hour plane ride with this guy and just listen and just tell me about everything and just sit there and listen. Like, it's like one of those, like, listen to a ghost story or fireside chat where everything that they're telling you is just fascinating. You can't wait to learn more. And I think, the story, I think the reveal is yet to be revealed yet. And I think once we get to that point, I mean, it's going to be like a free for all as far as, it's going to be a land grab for who wants this project. Right now, we're sort of just leaving the breadcrumbs along the trail. And as it builds up speed and momentum, I think it's just, everything has a time and a place in Hollywood. I mean, I actually photographed the last 4 survivors that were on the USS Arizona, and they wrote a screenplay. And I told the father of one of the survivors, I said, look, man, it took 15 years to get Mayraid. And that was like, because Jamie Foxx hadn't come along yet. It's like, you can never push anything in Hollywood. It's like, when it's ready, it's ready.
Yep.
Thanksgiving dinner smells really good 30 minutes in, but it's got 3 more hours to cook. Until, if you're not going to wait for that 3 hours, you're not going to get what the real potential of it is. And so I think, just keep moving forward. I mean, that's
yeah. I mean, we are, and we have been, and we have a lot of things in the iron right now, investigative wise, and also on, the entertainment side. My wife and I, just like you, I mean, I've 30 years in the business as well. Started out in
20.
features.
Yeah.
We've
Over
been doing
20, 25. Yeah. We've been doing this forever. My dad
survived.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we survived,
Yeah.
basically. I mean, I went to school in Marin County because it was down the street from Lucasfilm. So that gives you an idea of where I started with it.
Yeah.
So, but I was, that we have a love of film and movies. And one of the first series I ever produced for AMC was behind the scenes of movies that almost didn't get made. Because like you say, it's all about the timing. I talked to every celebrity, every producer, actor, whatever, director of all the Academy Award winning films that almost didn't get made. Yeah. So for this, when we saw this book, we're like, we're getting this made. Yeah. I don't care when, I don't care how, it's happening. So
that's awesome.
We're totally in that same school of thought of like, things do happen when they're supposed to. Obviously, Ken, your History Channel experience wasn't supposed to happen. So now there's other things happening.
Exactly.
So there's always a reason
more information
for things.
Sometimes you get a window, and sometimes you get a door, and sometimes the door's closed, and it's, some of the greatest stories in Hollywood were about somebody turned something down, and then something else was available. I mean, the stories go on and on. I mean, I had one of the first projects I worked on when I moved to Hollywood from Chicago. I got a chance to work with Dean Cundy, who's, legendary. He was telling me stories about Halloween, and like the budget for Halloween was like $375,000. It was like a single camera.
Yeah.
And I said, I asked him, because this guy's got like an IMDb that, is just second to none.
It'll choke you.
Yeah. And I said, Dean, out of all the movies that you've shot, I go, do you have a favorite? And he said, the Back to the Future series was the most fun for him because he got to explore such a broad range of timelines that it was like you're looking at a future, you're looking at the Western aspect of it, and just really neat. And just the whole story about how they replaced Eric Stoltz and Michael J. Fox came in. I'm like, all the stuff that happens behind the scenes, like most of the time it's more exciting than the movie itself.
I know.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
Behind the scenes stuff when I'm shooting and people don't want to see the pretty pictures, like, oh, what's the setup look like? Where's he got the lights? Where's the camera? And they're looking around. I learned stuff just from seeing behind the scenes pictures, because as a cinematographer, I tell people, like, my work doesn't inspire me. My work is rewarding to me when I get to accomplish something that I set out to do, but I look at other people's projects that inspire me, like looking at Ken's and going, that's really inspiring. Like, I couldn't come up with anything like that on my own. I'm not a writer. I'm a good idea guy, but I couldn't write. I have to use ChatGPT to send an email most of the time.
Yeah. No, I get what you say about that, but like when you're in the middle of it, and even like in projects, like we've been all the projects we've slugged through, and that there were horrible nightmares, and they turned then the final result turns out great. It's always like the glory is in talking about after the fact. Is like because like in the moment it's excruciating, like all the stuff that we've been dealing with Ken and trying to prove a lot of these things, and talking to people down in Brazil, and we hired like this crack team of former U.S. Marshals to go down there and look for people, and with Interpol and stuff, all this stuff. And it's just like, you put all this effort into it, and there's like heartbreak after heartbreak when you don't get the result you want. And it's kind of the same thing with filmmaking, where you put so much effort into trying to get your story told. But now it's getting, that's why we started doing the podcast for a variety of reasons, not just specifically this one, but for a bunch of other stories that we wanted to tell that we didn't have the resources to go out and make a documentary, or, we would be pitching these things, our podcasts simultaneously as we're doing the podcast. And we've been fortunate enough to get some hits and some, deals based upon that. But, we're storytellers at heart, and, we want to get the story out. For me, it's like, I felt like this was, because Ken and Mike contacted us thinking they were just going to do one podcast about their book, just to promote their book a little bit. And here we are, like 55 hours
a year later.
I love it.
And we're still digging, because I was like, there's more here. There's more to talk about. Every time we're like, I'll text Ken on a Monday, I go, when can you do the podcast? And he goes, oh, I'm free here. And Mike and I go, well, what are we talking about? And then like within probably 5 minutes, we'll figure out what we're going to talk about, because there's so much fucking to talk about with this stuff. There's just so much, because and then what's really interesting about Ken and Mike's book is that it's not just the escape. It's like you have all these different dramatic elements. You have the Fred Breezy story, where a childhood friend goes off, gets his pilot license because the father wanted to get him his pilot license to get him away from the Anglin brothers because they were a bad influence. Right. He turns out to be a drug running plane pilot for the mob, and then he introduces them to Mickey Cohen, which opens up this whole door, and then that's what. It's just crazy. It's just you can't write this. Like when you sit there,
make it up.
You cannot make it up. And then all the connections, and then the possible Kennedy connection with Candy Barr and Mickey Cohen, and Jack Ruby. It's like it's nuts. It's nuts. It's like you couldn't like. A screenwriter couldn't make this stuff up. And then to still have John and Clarence all through this and their character, when you have someone like Whitey Bulger, and who's basically saying, these are really good guys. These guys are like, because you have like, and it's like, so it like defines their character, that they're likable, and you're rooting for them, and they're not bad guys. And if it wasn't for, one of them getting involved with a married woman, they would have never met. They would have never made it to Alcatraz. It's just like a comedy, because they got away with the bank robbery. They weren't going to get caught. And so it's
but like even with the bank robbery, they helped a woman who fainted. Like, these are good guys. Yeah. They weren't in there shooting it up. They were like, we just want to not have to be poor.
Exactly.
And you kind of feel for them. You're like, okay, I get it.
So I talked to an individual day before yesterday, down in a little town called Iron City, where all of the Anglins grew up at before they moved to Ruskin. And one of the individuals that I was talking to, he doesn't, I guess the lady has already died, but she was actually in the bank when John and Clarence robbed the bank.
Oh my God.
And she told him what happened inside of the bank. She said, they came in and, they weren't yelling or screaming or anything. They basically told everybody, we're going to rob the bank. And he said that they sat down and, no one freaked out. They got the money, and she backed up that, one of the ladies was pregnant and felt kind of faint. Clarence stopped everything, went, got her a glass of water.
Oh my God.
And then they exited the bank and left. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, like, you can't.
It's such a great element of the story. I love that, because to me that makes them like really likable even more, so you want them to succeed. You're like, okay, go, escape, get out of here.
Everybody loves that guy sometimes.
When you read the accounts of the trial, you read what happened in their federal trial, which is what they went through first. You can actually see there was a plea bargain that they did. And, I can guarantee you, they probably thought and were told, you go off, do your federal time, John got 10, the other two got 15. And we know Alfred even got out of Atlanta after just 5 years. So they were probably, okay, we're going to go do this, pled guilty. But then the state of Alabama came in and wanted to give them the death penalty, charged them all over again for the same crime, wanted to put them to death. I mean, this is the old Southern good boy back then.
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine what it looked like. And then eventually they get 25 years each on top of their 10 and 15-year sentence. So that's what really set them over the edge. That's when they said, we're not going to stand for this. We're not going to stay in jail. And with their skills that they had, it was only a matter of time before they broke out.
Yep.
I think it's interesting too, Ken, is that, just the backstory of the family and things like that. It's like people without means have to be resourceful. They have to figure stuff out on their own. It's, I was the 2 + 2 is 4 kid. And so I get that, it's some of the craziest things I've ever done on movie sets and most successful were things that we didn't hardly have a budget.
Yeah.
And I
Sure.
tell stories all day long, but it's, one of my favorite quotes is by Helen Keller. She said, the only thing worse than being blind is having sight without vision. And I think to have the vision to not only, I think we can get out of here, but how are we going to do it? I mean, that takes vision. That's not something that you just go like, oh, let's go to the library and see, like, how do you break out of a prison?
Yeah.
And John, when he was on the way to Alcatraz, he's on the boat going out to the island. And once he gets here, he writes a letter home to his mom. And he basically said, you could hear him in the letter saying, I told the guy the boat ride was kind of nice, but it was going the wrong direction. Promise you, he was already planning what
how
he
to
was
get
going
out.
to do.
I love it.
He was not one of these guys that was going to go sit in that jail cell and go, okay, well, I guess I'm here for the next 15, 20 years. I mean, his mind was already spinning, okay, sure. What can I do to get out?
Yeah. And the amazing thing about all this is that they didn't have a chance to even road test any of what they were doing. No. So what they were doing, they had to just do it. It's like, there was no trial and error here. I mean, I'm sure there was a little bit just like making the dummies, but they had a plan, and it wasn't an experiment. It was a plan. It was like, this is what we're doing. So, and like things would come up along the way. Like, when Alan West discovered behind the, in the, the service area, that there was tools left behind, that they would just leave tools behind there in that area behind their cells when they're like that. But they learned how to pivot so quickly to their advantage and just take other people's suggestions, like Whitey's suggestion about preparing them for the cold water, since he had scuba diving experience, and what they're going to have to do as far as with their clothes to kind of make themselves makeshift wetsuits and and then just and unfortunately had someone with a very high IQ, Frank Morris, who was on their team, who figured out, all right, how can we learn how to vulcanize rubber inside a friggin' prison? It's like, I've been in a lot of prisons doing prison documentaries. I've probably been in about 10 or 15, most of the ones in California. So I've seen how these places are, and I've seen how they're run. And there's so many layers of things that you have to go through. And I've been to old ones too. I've been to the old Folsom, and it's basically an old Civil War fort that they converted into a prison, and they just built a prison around it, but you still see the limestone walls and all the stuff and stuff like that. So it's crazy that they were able to assess all that, pivot when they needed to pivot, and they did it in like record time. It's like a year and a half, something like that. Can't remember how many months it was, but it was in a short period of time since they didn't spend a whole lot of time in Alcatraz.
No. Nope. I mean, John got there in 1960, Clarence in 61, and they're out in 62. So, yeah. I mean, they were not there that long. But you think of how gutsy they were, and how daring and risk-taking that they were. Because I was thinking the other day, when some people might think, oh, well, the first time they put the head in the bed was when they went out to escape. But that's not true. They actually put that head in the bed multiple nights as they went behind the wall to, construct the raft, or if they were putting together tools. And so I started thinking, I was like, okay, so that guard, whoever the guard was, I know the night of the escape, he didn't, he supposedly he didn't do his round. But think about some of the nights that the guards did do the rounds, and they walked by those beds, and they, I don't know how many times they looked down at those dummy heads. And I wonder if they ever thought, gosh, why is Clarence sleeping in the same position every single night?
Every single night?
I mean, his head, because the head was only made to go one way. And so why is his covers always up to his nose?
Yeah.
It's like,
well, they were banking on,
they didn't even consider.
I know they were banking on the monotonous job of a prison guard, where a lot of stuff doesn't happen. Where it's just the same every day, and they mark time. I mean, it's like, when something happens, like, oh, well, why don't they poke their heads each time they go through? It's just, why would they wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Like there's nothing going on. There's
nothing going on. It's nothing going on.
Waiting for the sun to come up.
Exactly. And then like I said, we're not obviously, independent in the fact that this is a very, very, intense story. There's also, I think a lot of us kind of romance about it a little bit, because it's the ultimate thing, a prison escape. It's like I said, the only other, movie out there that kind of relates to this is Papillon, which has that, it's an island and they have to escape and they got to figure it out. And,
I saw that as a kid.
Yeah. But that, I think it's really indicative to the fact that Ken's tenacity for trying to find this story, and really, I mean, it's been years now that he's been studying this and researching this, and and for the last year we've been helping him, just trying to hire genealogists and DNA people to try to figure out what, and to prove what we believe is the theory that not only did they escape off the island, that they did make it to Brazil, and they lived, majority of their lives out there, and that hopefully that some of the things that we're going to reveal in the future will be the definitive proof of that. We have our arch nemesis, Art Roderick, who we love to death, but it's like, and he comes on here, he's been on here twice, and Ken's talked to him, has had heated debates with him, friendly heated debates about, his theory from the government side. And, And he's quick to say that he was on the last time he was here. He goes, well, it's going to come out. He goes, there's, what you're saying is all wrong, and they died in the bay and stuff like that. So it's like, and we're like, okay, we're waiting for your information, Art. So hopefully he can provide that. But that doesn't stop us, because we've had other people in the government that's looked all this information, some of which that worked with Art, and they were pretty stupefied at the evidence that we have, because we haven't released all of it. There's a lot left that we still have to do, but we're being very cautious because we want to make sure that we can actually prove this. But there's not only circumstantial evidence, but real hard evidence about where they ended up, and that's, to me, I think is going to be really interesting to eventually reveal to the world and the public. And who knows, we could be wrong, but I think having someone like Ken, who's a family member, as opposed to having someone who just was like you and I, Paulo, who are interested in the story, that did the research, there's no way we'd be able to fill in those gaps that Ken has.
Right. Yeah. It's not like we're watching Geraldo opening up a
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting.
That's awesome. I mean, I think, kind of rewinding a little bit of stuff that you said earlier, I had the privilege of working on the TV series The Untouchables from 1992 to 1994. And the guy that played Al Capone, William Forsythe, he spent a lot of time with the family, Park, where, that they were at. And he would ask questions like, well, how, because he wanted to be true to the role. He didn't want to, no actor wants to fall on their face trying to, portray someone that famous in history. And so he would talk to the family and what was he like? And what were some of his mannerisms and things like that? And I got to remember a couple of times there was some blowouts on set where William Forsythe would refuse to say something because he said Al Capone would never do that, because there's people that write, their job is to create story and interest and how do we keep things going? And, a lot of the people that, he was involved with, of course, he was, correct me if my history is wrong, but he was at Alcatraz as well.
Exactly.
Yes, he was.
So, I think it's ironic. The guy that pulled off all this stuff, died of something non-violent and he tried to escape and he got shot from somebody on the wall at that night. He just he just kind of went in a different way. But I got to learn a lot of the history of Al Capone during that time. And that was very fascinating to me too, some of the stuff that we would recreate and some of the things that were told by the story. His grandson, his name is Sonny, Al Capone's grandson, and it's frightening. He looks exactly like him. It's almost like Al Capone.
Skipped a generation.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah. It's like I don't look anything like my dad, but I look exactly like my mom's father.
Yeah.
Who actually died the week before I was born.
Yeah, that's
and I have the same story. I heard my my mom saying you look a lot like my father. There's a lot of the features and things like that. And he died I think a month before I was born. I was born right before Kennedy got assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
So 63.
Oh, wow.
Cool. This is a great. I'm sorry. What you say?
History is just fascinating to me. I mean, I failed miserably in high school when we had to pass the Constitution test. To get to graduate. I failed it 3 times because I'm dyslexic and I'm flipping numbers. And I just did a slalom course to get out of the class and to graduate. But now I'm fascinated with it because I'm not forced that I have to do something. I just wow, that's interesting, and next thing you know, you're going down a rabbit hole and you're on the internet all night looking for stuff that's connected to it. And,
and then when you can reach out to someone like Ken and have a connection to something that you're interested in, that has something, that's been in history. I mean, that's the juice we have. It happens to us all the time. Yeah. It's where, you get to talk to these people, you get to interview them, you get to really find out what kind of, what motivated all of this and see the stories behind the stories. Because as we all know, you only have a limited amount of time when you're doing these things to kind of really tell the whole story. And the whole story it's usually like this much as opposed to, a mountain's worth of information.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just excited to see the progress that Ken's made, and that he didn't give up on this and like, wow, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. I mean, most people give up right before they're going to hit success. And it's unfortunate because, the difference in temperature between hot water and boiling water is like 1 degree.
Yeah.
Like if you'd have just kept going, you would have had steam, but it's like, oh, I don't know, how long is this? I don't think this is working. But it's his family. It's important to him. It's important to you guys. I know it's important to me that I'm, to be a part of something that's this cool. I mean, I don't look for projects because of money or anything else. It's like, if I'm excited and I'm interested and I'm passionate about something, you've heard this before. My dad said it to me over and over again. I was growing up, like, you do something you love and you never work a day in your life.
Yeah, you're not working.
Yeah.
I still feel that way right now. I'm just as excited now at, 62 years old as I was when I was, 20 breaking into the business. It's just like you can't hide your enthusiasm, but when you're bored, if you don't do something to like, why am I bored? Am I just not interested? Or is this like, I'm not really stimulated. This isn't really in my wheelhouse. But I think more and more you're seeing the success of documentaries and real stories that people want to hear. And there's so many great ones out there, but unfortunately, the Hollywood system, a lot of times, they're looking for the action figures and the franchise this and the franchise that, and not everything has to be 17 episodes,
Exactly. Well, as you know, it's changing in tectonic shifts right now. So Absolutely. Who knows what's going to happen next? But for us, we've always been, never really been part of the studio system. I mean, we've worked for a lot of networks and stuff like that.
I worked for the studios for like 5 years, but then after that, when we started doing documentaries and unscripted, we never really did reality. We did unscripted docuseries, but it's mostly stories that we really wanted to do or tell, like turn down big shows that I was like, I don't want to do that. That's not what's going to make me happy at all. And focused more on projects that we're passionate about. And I think that that's the key, because if you don't follow your passion, then you're just going to be floating along and not in this kind of industry where you're telling stories and people are giving you their life stories like this. You have to be enthusiastic, you have to be passionate about it, or
that's part
it's
of the
just
respect.
Not going to get made properly,
And we fight all the time for like people, when we're doing stuff and like and the networker will come in and say, well, we want this to happen and we want that. I go, well, that's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
And we're not going to say that.
Telling true life stories and true crime stories. I mean, victims' families, and we're very, very sensitive to that because it's Ken's family.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, it's important to do that. I mean, it's funny too, because you said, like you've turned down things. Like when I got the opportunity to photograph the last guys that were on the USS Arizona, I left the TV series that I was working on, making really good money, and people thought I was nuts. But I shared my passion for what I was doing on social media, and I went to GoFundMe, which I knew nothing about. And I said, look, here's what I'm going to do. And I have this opportunity, and it's like, I'm looking to see if anybody else might be interested in seeing me pull this off. And I crowdfunded the entire thing. Literally.
Nice. Good for you. That's what I'm talking about.
Good for you.
It's like, that's awesome. That's independent, filmmaking at its finest. You just decide you're going to do something and
you just do it,
and you find the way to do it. Like every independent film that I've done, it's like, I start blocking out, I start storyboarding, I start doing shot lists. And by the time I'm ready to shoot, I have the money.
Yeah.
You figure out, it just kind of appears. So you have to really, and that's
awesome.
That's what we've been doing with Ken's project. We've been willing it, and we've been getting a lot of interest. So that's good. So, and we have a lot of things in the works, which is also good. And we're hopefully, soon we're going to make some announcement. But just wanted to thank you again, Paulo, for being on. And we'll keep you up to date on everything's going on here. But just a general podcast announcement. Well, we won't be on next week because we're going to be at Alcatraz for 3 days.
Good for you.
Ken and Mike are going to be doing a book signing event, and we just got approval to be able to do the podcast. We'll do we're going to try to do 3 podcasts from Alcatraz Island because we just got permission to do that. So It's going to be exciting. So anybody who doesn't see us next week, just know the week after, the 3 weeks after, we're going to have some pretty amazing content, basically doing the podcast, talking to people that are buying the book. And also hopefully we're going to try to see if we can do one of the podcasts literally right outside the cells where they escaped. So it's going to be pretty exciting. We're really excited about it. And, Paulo, we really enjoyed your perspective, and my God, I mean, you basically tipped off the book. So it's like, thank you for your help in this and supporting Ken's family story. And we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm going to talk to Ken offline here when we finish up and see if I can figure out a way to get out to Alcatraz, because I would love nothing more than to go back there again. I mean, it's been 19 years since I was there. And every time I'm there, it's just like I'm 16 years old again.
Yeah.
For the first time and going, oh my gosh, like I had no idea. Like this place started a career in Hollywood for me. And oddly enough, the picture that I took, which I'll share with you guys, I'll email to you. This guy was standing walking next to the camera. He had a cup of coffee, wearing Ray-Ban aviator glasses, and he looked right at me as I was taking the picture. And it took me literally 28 years later, I got to work with that guy, and I gave him a hug like he was my long lost, family member. And I'm like, I took a picture when I was 16 years old. I'm like, oh my God, it was like meeting, a celebrity, like it was just this guy that was standing there, and it's just funny. Like
it's all those connections. Like, I in 2011, I got the chance to direct Clint Eastwood and for this law enforcement museum thing. So I got to spend time with him, and it's like these connections, these little connections, all, the fact that it didn't, but it's great. It's great. So thanks for being on. And, we're going to end the recording, but just stay on for a sec.